Hello, I'm Dr. Adam, a urologist with over 25 years of experience helping men live healthier, stronger, and more confident lives, especially after 60. Every week, I share real advice, surprising science, and personal stories from my patients, because it's time we talk openly about men's health without fear or shame. What I'm about to share may surprise you, but it could change the way you take care of your body, your mind, and your manhood. Let's get started. There's a silence that creeps in as the years stretch behind you. Not the peaceful silence of early morning walks or the hush of snow settling on an old roof. No, this is the silence of vanishing touch, of unasked questions, of a man staring into his own reflection and wondering, where did I go? At 62, you begin to realize that the world no longer looks at you the same way. Not your wife, not the woman at the grocery store who used to smile a little longer, not even yourself. The edge dulls, and in that dullness, you begin to feel like a ghost of your former self alive, but not fully living. It doesn't happen all at once. The loss sneaks up like shadows in a house you once built with certainty. One morning, you wake up and the urge you once lived by your hunger for closeness, for sex, for being needed in that way is quieter. Not gone, but faint. You tell yourself it's just stress, just fatigue, maybe a bad night's sleep. But it comes again and again, until the nights become indistinguishable from the days, and the weight of not being touched turns into something you wear in your bones. Your doctor shrugs. Age, he says. Normal. Maybe some testosterone patches if you're lucky. A blue pill if you're not. But you know deep down, this isn't just about blood panels and hormones. This is about something else, something unspoken in locker rooms and lost in polite conversations. It's about the slow erosion of a man's identity when the one thing that once made him feel powerful, desirable, even dangerous, begins to flicker like an old neon sign. You remember when it was different, when you couldn't walk into a room without feeling the charge of possibility, when a single glance could ignite something in you that felt unstoppable. Back then, your body responded before you even thought about it. Desire was not something you had to summon. It lived in you, right beneath the skin. You didn't have to ask for it, or wonder if it would show up when you needed it. It was just there, constant, reliable, like gravity. But now, intimacy feels like a foreign country. You might still love your partner, deeply even, but the touch between you has grown cold with the years, not from a lack of affection, but from an unspoken fear. What if you can't rise to the occasion? What if your body doesn't answer the call? You pretend it doesn't matter. You bury yourself in chores, distractions, old habits. You joke about getting older, about slowing down, about taking naps at 3 p.m. But underneath the laughter, there's something deeper, a mourning, not just for your virility, but for what it meant to be that man. No one tells you that aging isn't just about joints and memory lapses. It's about disappearing from the world of touch, of no longer being looked at with that particular kind of wanting. You notice it when you walk into a room and people talk around you, not to you. You notice it in the way your own clothes fit differently, how your skin folds and loosens. You feel like a man watching his own life from the shore, unable to swim back to where the fire used to burn. And somewhere in this unraveling, a question forms, quiet at first, then louder as the years go on. Am I still a man if I can't perform? It's not about ego. It's not about conquest. It's about connection. about knowing that your body can still be a bridge to someone else's longing, that you are still here, fully, with blood in your veins and fire in your chest. But that fire, it flickers, and the shame of that flicker can be more devastating than the loss itself. You begin to measure yourself in silent failures, a half-formed erection, an avoided touch, a night when you rolled away instead of reaching out. You tell yourself it's nothing, you pretend it's fine, but it gnaws at you. It reshapes the way you move through the world. You start to shrink, just slightly, in spirit. You stop flirting, stop dancing, stop imagining. Because what's the point of fantasy if you're not sure your body can meet it? And in all of this, no one talks to you. Not really. There's no guidebook, no honest conversations. Just commercials promising magic pills and miracle cures, preying on the hunger you no longer want to admit you have. But deep inside, that hunger hasn't died. It's just buried. And what's worse, it's ashamed. Ashamed of needing. Ashamed of not delivering. Ashamed of being a man in a body that no longer obeys like it once did. This isn't about vanity. It's about touch. About intimacy. About lying next to someone and knowing that the bridge between your bodies hasn't collapsed. About feeling worthy of being desired not for what you once were, but for who you still are. And that kind of worth. It can't be bought in a bottle. It has to be rebuilt. From the inside out. From honesty. From facing the mirror and not turning away. But before that rebuilding, there is a reckoning. A quiet confrontation. And it begins here with the silent truth that something has changed. That you can't go back. That the boy is gone. The young man faded, and in his place stands someone older, quieter, but no less in need of meeting fully alive. The journey ahead is not about chasing youth. It's about reclaiming manhood on new terms, fiercer terms, not based on performance but presence, not on dominance but depth. But before that, you must go deeper into the dark, into the loneliness, into the shame. Only then can something real begin again. There's a peculiar kind of loneliness that lives in men past 60. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with tears or confession. It lingers in silence over dinner, in the space between your partner's breathing, in the way your hand hovers but never lands on her back. It's the loneliness of fading potency, of no longer being the man who could move mountains with desire alone. And no one warns you how profound that loss will feel, not because of the act itself, but because of what it meant who you were when your body still answered you with certainty. You remember the last time you tried and failed, not dramatically. No collapse of masculinity in flames, just a quiet moment, your body hesitant, your spirit pretending not to care. You joked, shrugged, said maybe you were just tired. But later, in the dark, you lay there staring at the ceiling, cold with a grief no one could see. You didn't cry. Men like you don't cry. But the tears still came, dry and silent, in the shape of retreat. You stopped trying, stopped reaching, stopped hoping. Not because you didn't want her, but because you couldn't bear the weight of her disappointment. Or worse, her pity. Shame is a slow poison. It doesn't roar. It whispers. It tells you you're no longer a man, not in the ways that matter. It rewrites your memories, twisting them into reminders of what you've lost. Every touch you use to initiate now becomes a risk. Every glance, a test. You start to pull away, not to punish her, not to deceive her, but to protect yourself. Because every failed attempt feels like another crack in your armor. And soon, you're not just avoiding sex, You're avoiding vulnerability. You become a man locked behind his own ribs, guarded by silence and half smiles. You start to believe that your value is transactional, that without arousal, you're useless, that without erection, you're invisible. And slowly, your world begins to shrink. You focus on routine, on responsibility, on fixing the leaky faucet and paying the bills. You become the reliable man, the quiet man, the one who no longer demands attention, who no longer flirts with danger or touch. And the tragedy is, no one notices. Because this kind of loss hides in plain sight. You can go years like this, numb, functioning, dying in small, invisible ways. You watch younger men with a mix of envy and disdain. Their swagger, their heat, their urgency, it reminds you of what you once had, but also mocks you for not having it anymore. And still, you pretend. You nod when they talk about their conquests. You laugh at their crude jokes. But inside, you are drowning, not in bitterness, in longing, in the deep, aching need to feel again. Not just to have sex, but to be touched like you matter. To be wanted not out of duty or nostalgia, but because your presence still sparks something wild and tender in another. There's a moment, maybe it's different for every man, when the mask starts to crack. For you, it might come at 2 a.m. in the dark, after another silent night beside your partner. Or maybe it happens when you catch your own reflection, shirtless, belly softer, chest less defined, and feel a wave of revulsion you don't speak aloud. Or maybe it happens when your partner, still loving, still warm, touches you in that familiar way and you flinch, not from her touch, but from your own fear that you won't respond. That's the moment shame turns to sorrow. Real sorrow. The kind that humbles you, breaks you. You realize this isn't about testosterone. It's not about pills. It's about connection. About a body that once knew its purpose and now trembles under doubt. You remember being inside someone and feeling not just aroused, but alive. You remember the look in her eyes when you made her come undone, and how that look made you feel like a god. You didn't need praise or gratitude. You just needed to know you could give her that, to know your body had the power to bridge the gap between you. But now the gap feels wider. Your hands still want to love her. Your mind still plays the old tapes. But your body, the very core of your manhood, has forgotten the choreography. And that gap becomes a canyon. You try to cross it, but every failed attempt drives you further back into yourself. And the worst part isn't the physical failure, it's the loss of who you are in her eyes. Or at least, who you think you are in her eyes. Because that's the twist, isn't it? The shame isn't always real. Sometimes it's imagined, projected, inflated by your own belief that you are no longer worthy of being touched. But she still loves you. Maybe she misses you. Maybe she's just as lost, wondering where the man who used to burn with heat has gone. Maybe she aches for the same intimacy, but doesn't know how to reach you anymore. Maybe she's been told, like you have, that aging means retreat, that passion belongs to the young, that touch becomes a luxury once bones begin to ache. But maybe, just maybe, none of that is true. Because something begins to stir inside you, not out of anger, not out of ego, but from a deeper place, a question that won't go away. What if I am still a man? What if my body isn't broken, just unheard? What if this isn't the end, but the beginning of something deeper, wilder, more honest than youth ever allowed? But before you can rebuild, you must strip everything down, all the lies, all the pride, all the scripts you've been handed about what it means to be a man. You must sit in the rubble and admit, I don't know who I am anymore. And that's okay, because in that moment of raw surrender, something real begins. Not an answer, not a cure, but a crack in the armor, a sliver of light. You start to ask the hard questions. What do I want, not just sexually, but intimately? What does it mean to be touched when you're older? When your body has scars and memory and slowness, can sex be something more than performance? Can it be a return to self, to connection, to worth? You don't have the answers, not yet. But the questions, they burn, and that fire is sacred. And maybe, just maybe, you start to talk to your partner, to a friend, to yourself. Not with bravado, not with shame, but with honesty. You say, I miss being close, I miss being touched, I miss feeling like a man. And maybe she hears you. Maybe she's been waiting for this moment too. Because behind the silence, she's been carrying her own grief, her own questions, her own aching hunger. This is where the turning begins. Not with pills, not with performance, but with truth. With two people standing in the ashes of what they used to be, daring to imagine something new. Not just sex, but soul-level connection. Not just erection, but arousal of the whole self. And it starts with a choice. To stop hiding. To stop pretending. To stop being a ghost in your own life. It starts with you deciding once and for all that your value was never in your hardness alone. It was in your presence, your tenderness, your willingness to be fully seen, fully felt, fully alive even in a body that trembles with time. It begins in the quiet, not with some triumphant return or a sudden surge of testosterone, but with stillness, a moment where you stop running from yourself. You stand there, in your own skin, no longer trying to perform, no longer clinging to the myth of what was. You breathe. You notice the weight of your body, the ache in your back, the softness of your belly, the tenderness in your chest. And for the first time in a long while, you don't flinch. You don't rush to fix or hide or deny. You just be. And that simple act of presence, of acceptance, is the first act of power. You begin to touch again, not as a precursor to performance, but as a language. You let your hands speak without agenda. You sit with your partner and look into her eyes without turning away. Even when the vulnerability burns, you tell her you're scared. You tell her you miss her. You tell her you don't know how to go back, but you want to go forward. And maybe, for the first time in years, she sees you not the version of you that you've been trying to preserve like an old photograph, but the man you are now, slower, warmer, deeply alive. This is not about reclaiming youth. It is about rewriting the story of manhood in a body that has weathered decades. You realize that sex at 60, 70, even beyond, is not a lesser version of what came before. It is a deeper one. The urgency is gone. Yes, but in its place, there is attention. In its place, there is care. There is time to explore not just her body, but your own. To discover where pleasure now lives. To find the hidden nerves, the overlooked touch points, the rhythms that once hid in the shadow of fast and hard. You stop chasing erections as proof of manhood. You learn that your worth is not limited to the rise and fall of blood in your groin. You discover that intimacy can begin long before and long after that moment. It lives in the slowness of undressing without shame. It lives in the way your lips trace the lines time has carved on her skin. It lives in the way you listen to her breath, her hesitation, her longing. And in return, she listens to you. She learns to read your body again, not as it was, but as it is rich with history, aching with truth. And in this new terrain, something unexpected happens. Your body begins to trust you again, without pressure, without shame. It begins to respond not to demand, but to invitation. Maybe not always in the way it once did. Maybe slower, maybe softer, but with a different kind of power. A grounded, awakened power that doesn't perform, it connects. And in that connection, you remember what it means to feel like a man, not because you conquered, but because you were present, because you opened. You start to take care of yourself, not to recapture something lost, but to honor what still remains. You eat better. You move. You stretch. Not for aesthetics, but for vitality. You touch yourself not in secret, not with shame, but with curiosity, like reacquainting yourself with an old friend. You breathe into your belly. You feel the heat return, not all at once, but in pulses, in whispers. You explore what arousal means when it's not demanded. You learn that your prostate is not an enemy, but a gate. That your perineum is not irrelevant, but alive. That your breath can awaken more than your touch ever could. You learn to slow everything down, to spend an hour kissing, to spend an afternoon tracing her back with nothing but your fingertips, to rediscover your lips, your scent, the way your hands make her feel held, not just desired. And she blossoms, too. Because when you stop demanding from your body, she stops performing for hers. She lets go of her fear of disappointing you. She lets go of her own shame, and together, you enter a new language, one written not in hardness or conquest, but in presence and surrender. You begin to understand that aging is not a loss, but a refinement. The flame of youth may burn bright, but the coals of age burn deep. And in that depth, there is a different kind of heat, one that doesn't scorch, but sustains. You don't need the frenzy anymore. You don't need to prove anything. You need to feel, to be felt, to be held as fully as you hold. And that is the PowerPoint no pill can give you. The source not of performance, but of potency. Rooted not in testosterone, but in truth. And truth begins to heal you. It softens the places where shame once lived. It quiets the old voices that told you your worth ended at your waistline. You speak more openly now with her, with yourself, maybe even with other men. You realize you're not alone, that there are thousands of others out there silent, aching, pretending. You wish someone had told you earlier that this was part of the journey, that there's no shame in change, that arousal evolves, that desire never leaves, it just asks for different doors. You start to embrace practices that once seemed foreign or unnecessary: breathwork, pelvic floor awareness, touch meditation. Not because they promise some magic cure, but because they bring you home to your body. You learn to hold arousal in your belly, in your chest, in your spine. You learn that orgasm doesn't need to be the goal, that ejaculation is not the end of the story, that pleasure can be slow, circular, expansive, that your whole body can become an instrument, not just a tool. And this shift, it touches everything. Your confidence returns, not in volume, but in gravity. You walk differently. You speak more slowly. You listen more. You no longer fear rejection because you no longer tie your worth to outcome. You are no longer a man seeking validation. You are a man offering presence, offering depth, offering truth. And women feel that. They sense it. The world senses it. You become magnetic again, not because you are young, but because you are whole. You stop chasing erections and start inviting eros. You stop fearing softness and start embracing sensitivity. You stop hiding behind the myth of male virility and start stepping into the sacredness of embodied masculinity. Not rigid, not hollow, but deeply felt. You don't need to be rock hard to be powerful. You need to be rooted, awake, courageous enough to be touched not just on the skin, but in the soul. This is your rebirth. Not a return to the man you once were, but the emergence of the man you were always meant to become. A man who knows his body not as a battlefield, but as a temple. A man who seeks not to dominate, but to connect. A man who understands that his greatest erection is not in his flesh, but in his presence, in his ability to stand naked in front of another and say, "This is who I am, all of me, and I am enough." So you keep going. You keep discovering. You keep waking up not just sexually, but spiritually. Because in the end, this was never just about sex. It was about wholeness. It was about healing. It was about remembering that manhood isn't something you lose with age, it's something you earn. And now, after all these years, you've finally begun to claim it.